Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you all can join us this morning. We have the very distinct pleasure of having Brad joining us for this member meetup to be able to share a little bit about his work and get to know more about the person that is behind the title of Curator of Herpetology. I know when I joined the museum, learning about how much research happens and takes place, it was mind-blowing because I only saw it as the building itself. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Brad, with us this morning.
Thank
How are
you.
you doing?
I'm doing well. I first want to say hi to, I can't see the people attending, but I see their names and gosh, I see all like Peter and Mike and Allison, welcome. I'm very happy that you're with us. Fred, I mean, all these people that I work with and I see on a daily basis with the last year of pandemic. I only get to see you on Zoom or just a name on a list, and I miss you. Um, yeah, just wanted to mention that I can't see you, but I'm sure thinking about everybody.
Well, that's the year of COVID, I guess. It's been
Yeah,
one of those things where we're taking stock of how much we appreciate our companionships with people, and I definitely miss all of our friends and members and guests that go to the museum and seeing their faces walk through our building. So that I certainly feel those sentiments, Brad. So thank you all for again joining us, and we're gonna jump right into this. And like Emily said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we will filter them in to Brad and kind of sprinkle them in throughout. But we'd like to get started, Brad, with the very first question that we'd like to get to know our member meetup guest is kind of to share their story of how they got to where they're at now and share a little bit of background of either anything personal or great stories that they like to share, because I know that's what members love to hear is kind of sitting around a campfire holding a cup of
hmm
coffee and just getting to know more the person that is Brad.
uh, yeah. Well, I don't know. Let's. I think we often say that each employee wears many hats at the museum, and you know, I do a lot of things as a curator, but I've also had a history with the museum where I literally have worn many hats. When I was an undergrad at San Diego State taking a herpetology class with the famous Dr. Richard Etheridge, who has long been involved with the museum himself. He came to class one day and said that um, uh, there's some volunteer opportunities down at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and that was back in 1988. And so I went down and interviewed and filled out all the paperwork, and I got the position. And I was so happy. Jim Berrien's wife, Robin Garcia, was the collections manager, and Robin started teaching me all about museum curation and prepping specimens. And so she knew that volunteers came and went. So one of the first things she did was she had a test. Apparently, I passed the test because I'm still with the museum. But her test was to open up the freezer and pull out the stinkiest specimen that you could ever imagine, and have me conduct an osteo prep on it, where I skin it, gut it, and dry it for the bug colonies. And oh boy, it was putrid. It was horrible. But little did she know I did this as a kid all the time. I would always be prepping animals for skeletons at home as a teenager. And yeah, it smelled, but I was also quite used to it. So kind of a gross story, but at the same time, I liked her test. I understood what it was about. Now that I think back, it's like, yeah, okay, that's if your volunteers can handle what we do, the worst of what we do as far as animal smells, then maybe they'll keep you. So
Yeah, they were putting you through your paces. Little did they know,
yeah.
young Brad, oh, he had this in the bag.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it was fun. I remember what it was. It was a spiny-tailed iguana that was a confiscation from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, some sort of smuggled animal that had rotted during the whole seizure, and so we made good use of that that animal, and I'm glad it's used for research now. It's well cataloged. I know where it is in the collection cabinets. I know that specimen well. It's like my first specimen that was cataloged at the museum.
Wow, you bring up a good story, Brad, and it kind of triggered me to want to ask a little bit more. So the collections that we get are usually like because either it was donated to us, but you mentioned this was a confiscated specimen. Is there any other kind of how do we gather our specimens and have the collection that we have now?
Yeah, in the olden days, it was just going out and learning for the first time what the diversity was locally. So Janet, I see you're here. Janet's grandfather, Lawrence Klauber, was our most famous curator that built the collection. He added the first 43,000 specimens that were all his cataloging. And so those came from not just him, but people from all over the country, all over the world. He was a great communicator. And so our history, I think that's one of our strengths as a museum, is that we have this legacy of continuity. And that legacy of continuity builds this resource, this collection resource that we use on a daily basis, and we share it with other scientists that can use it. And the information, now that we're in the digital age, is all up online. We map it. We all sorts of biodiversity analyses, all sorts of studies on animal wildlife and plant wildlife for the sake of botany, um, uh, are using our collections so much more than you probably ever really knew. Um, I think Michael Wall did a analysis on how many pings our distribution data gets in any one month, and it was in the tens of millions of hits that our online data was receiving. And so we're a real player in the global community of sharing diversity information.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And I know when I first walked through the collection, it is a beautiful space. But I hear that's not how it
Oh
started.
yeah, no.
It
When
was
I,
not always this beautiful, immaculate jars and organization to put there. So can you
yeah,
share a little bit more about that, Brad? Oh, I think we lost Brad.
sorry, I just got cut off for a
Oh, there
second.
you are.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what happened. It just went off. Um, am I back on,
Yep,
Hector?
you're back on.
Okay, it really like the screen went blank on me, so I don't know if my screen went blank, but I'm back. Um, uh, when I was a volunteer, this is 1988. In order to work at the museum was a real challenge in itself. It was almost like a survival expedition just to stay there the entire day. We had no heat in the building, no hot water. I think there was one bathroom for the entire building. And the collection itself sat in the footprint of our new wing where the theater and the atrium are now. And so there used to be a parking lot there, and the building was in the shape of an L. And there was a shed that was made out of plywood, and I think maybe some tar paper on top. It was a big shed that was shared with exhibits in herpetology. And the fire marshal had kicked the alcoholic collections out of the building because we couldn't, it was too dangerous with the facility we had, with no fire suppression. It was very rudimentary. This is just 30 years ago. Um, and and so we would go out to the shed and we would have to do what's called topping off parties. And this isn't, I had my college fun, yes. But topping off parties with alcohol and filling the jars was really because it was a temperature, the climate conditions in the room were so horrible. It would heat up to 120 degrees in the summer and it would drop down to, freezing in the winter. and the alcohol would expand and contract and expand and contract, and they would loosen all the lids on the jars, and then all this evaporation would happen. So about every 3 months, we had to go down and top off the jars to make sure the jars stayed filled. And it was a padlock on the door. Now we have this beautiful facility. I think most of you have taken tours down to the basement wet range, fire suppression systems, climate control. We just added, you saw that we just added a new air conditioning system down there.
Yeah.
Museum invested a huge amount of money for the climate controlled spaces that we have. And so now it's night and day. It's a beautiful facility. It's a world-class collection. And I think on Monday I have to start processing more loans now that I'm back from the field. Next week I'm going to start packing up another loan. We
Wow.
send them out. We Nowadays with COVID we have to send everything out, but we would send things out even with not being COVID.
Yeah. So then when you say that you package loans, people are checking out specimens and using them for research, or like, what exactly are they doing with the specimens that get sent out on loan?
Yeah, grad students all over the world. They need these resources, and instead of going out and collecting them, we already have them for them. And so I think the current one that was a request from a graduate student at Iowa State University under Dean Adams' lab, and she's going to be looking at phyllodactylid geckos and comparing these geckos that we have locally. So she needs 5 males and 5 females, adult sizes, and that will have two different species, Phylodactylus nocticulus and Phylodactylus partidus, and so very specific. She writes a very nice letter. Her CC's with the PI of the lab, her advisor. We make the loan forms out, pack them up very nicely. We mail them out to her. She opens them up. She gets to put them under the microscope, measure, do all the little analyses on the morphology that she wants to study, the particular subject she's looking at, which is mainly locomotion.
Mm.
And they have toe pads, so they all have different forms of toe pads, different sizes. And then she'll pack them back up and send them back, and we'll put them back in the jars. Takes an enormous amount of work, though. We want
Yeah.
to make sure that they get back to us, they're
Mhm.
organized. I'm a hyper organized person, luckily. So I
That's
get that.
great.
I get that from my mom. So she had to vacuum the carpet when I was a kid, so there would be no footprints, and that all the vacuum lines would all line up on the living room rug. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's great. That's
yeah.
amazing.
So she
Well, we're glad that those traits got carried down to you, and you brought that with us to the collection, because it sounds like the collection has grown over the years, and it's through people that are out there and the community that wants to contribute to that. But well, my question that came up was that I was contemplating was, what's the role of a, because it sounds like you are a mentor to a lot of grad students, and what role did mentors play for you, Brad, when you were um, getting your degree, finding your way through this career?
I think for this, for field biology and wildlife biology and these disciplines, the first thing that my mentors did was say that my interests weren't crazy and that it was okay. It was sort of like therapeutic to hear you grow up as a kid and you love wildlife, and yet everybody else is becoming doctors and lawyers and accountants and all these very important things in the world, and you decide that you're going to become a lizard biologist, and 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 so the first thing my mentors convinced me of is that it's okay. They succeeded in their path, and and so it was okay for you to try to succeed in this very atypical career discipline. And then from there, it's just the guidance, the different personality types that you see. Science can be very aggressive, in watching them navigate aggressive personalities. Gosh, some of the aggressive personalities are a real turnoff, but that's true about science. Um, and and so there, all these type A personalities trying to get ahead, and you know, and seeing that they navigate it with such grace, and you know, and being, like Jay Savage, um, you know, I remember I wrote Jay Savage a letter. He was at the Miami University at the time, University of Miami, and I asked him for some Chuckwalla specimens of which ones he had, and Jay packed up all of his Chuckwalla specimens and sent them to me with a letter that said, good luck with these encouragement. He didn't just, I was just inquiring about what he had,
Yeah.
and he sent the whole kit and caboodle to me without me even asking for them. And that generosity showed me that there was this other side of science that I much appreciated, that I may have not have been seeing at the time when I was a young grad student. I was mostly seeing the negative with the hyper, competitive
Mhm.
personalities, and then you see my advisors and mentors were gracious and sharing, and that was the beauty of, like I said, yes, there is it's not all negative. You always want to focus on the negative, huh? So,
Yeah, no, and you
and
bring up a really good point of on the other side of science, and I know a lot of times when we're talking to our curators, and especially recently, we wanting to talk a little bit about conservation ethics, and oftentimes if there's a significant life event that has occurred in our curator's life that says, oh yeah, I want to dedicate my life to this. And was there any moment in your life, Brad, that stands out as the moment where you're like, yes, I want to dedicate my life to this? I mean, it sounds like you were already doing this at a young age.
wasn't quite right out of the womb or anything, but grandmas. Uh, they, my grandma had a huge influence on me. Um, she traveled the world, and this is back in the '60s, and she's traveling the world, exploring. And she had, I grew up in Potomac, Maryland. My dad was working in the government, um, and um, and my grandma had a cabin on the Chesapeake Bay coastline, a lowland Atlantic deciduous forest, right in the heart of a beautiful woodland. And we would go out there on a regular basis. And I have older brothers. I'm the youngest of a conglomerate family of six, half brothers, half sisters, full brothers, full sister, that kind of thing. Like most, now that I look around, most Americans. Um, and and so my older brother came in, and he to the cabin. He had just been outside, and he was white, flushed, all excited, and he just saw this huge black snake. And it was probably actually this big, but he's like, I saw, he's probably 8 years old. I'm 4 years old, and I just remember that they had to restrain me from wanting to go see that snake. And of course, now I know better that by the time you get out to the road and it was a dirt road, and by the time I would get all the way out of the house to see the snake was long gone. Snakes don't stick around for anybody. Very secretive animals. Um, yeah, but in my head, I wanted to see that snake, and I remember all through my childhood about that snake I missed. My brother's reaction to it was he was fearful of it, excited but fearful, and I was excited and ecstatic over the idea of it. And I think when all of scientists get into our professional meetings, we all know we're a little bit of oddballs, where the snake scientists, especially, that we don't have a fear reaction. We have excitement reaction. I think our adrenaline triggers our brain with interest rather than fear. I think there's a fine line between hyper excitement and hyper fear. Um, I think it's all the same emotion. It's just how you interpret it.
Right. No, and it's a great story because a lot of times, yeah, it's moments in time where it was a little, maybe a split second that occurred where I saw 4-year-old Brad wanting to run out to the road and just
Yeah,
find this snake.
yeah, and think of what happened when 16-year-old Brad got his driver's license.
Oh man.
16-year-old Brad convinced his mom that I could go down to Mazatlan, Mexico, after we moved to California. Mazatlan was in striking distance for my VW Bug, and next thing I know is I'm driving the Durango Highway at a young age, missing my junior prom, and instead herping a what turns out to be a fairly crazy place of the world. But we were catching boa constrictors
Wow.
while my friends in high school were putting on funny looking tuxedos. So I don't have any pictures of me in a tuxedo. That those those very colorful, bright blue and bright green tuxedos that people wore back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s.
Wow.
Well, thank God I don't have a picture of myself in
And I'm
some corny looking tuxedo that
we
you
will
had to rent from
scour
the
we will
tuxedo
scour the
store.
internet to see if we can find some of those and then bring it to everyone that's listening today. Well, Brad, if you could believe it, we are coming to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you real quick, because you did bring up these amazing moments of your previous, young adult life, and these moments that seem so familiar. And with the current times of COVID, how has the museum or herpetology department changed over the years, and how is the team coping with this?
Uh, we're certainly it streamlined our focus. We can't do quite as much that we were doing before, but we prioritize those things that are important. And so, right when COVID started, we were in the middle of our red-legged frog reintroduction, um, and it was it was absolutely the most surreal maybe week in my life that I've ever experienced. We were down in beautiful Baja California, where the world is so far away from all of our worries, and coming over our phones and computers was this horrifying rollout of the initial pandemic response, and yet we still focused and were able to get we were transporting frog eggs up here to San Diego and Riverside counties for the first time. These animals, I'm a diversity biologist, and the fact that the diversity is leaving the planet right now is really disturbing. So the fact that we could maybe try to reverse at least some of that um, was, you know, something that I'll never forget. So COVID actually produced some of the most memorable time of my life because it was the most challenging, and it elevated the challenge, and we ended up succeeding in it. And that's, you know, I guess if we failed and it didn't all work, I feel differently about it. But because we have red-legged frogs back here in San Diego County for the first time in over 40 years, them being gone, um, the whole team that we work with, our partners are all on cloud nine. We're about to do it again too.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah.
Wow. Brad, thank you so much for taking time. You brought up a really good talking point that I know we could definitely go more in depth. But I know we want to welcome Emily back to tell us a little bit about upcoming events and where they might be able to hear you go into more depth about the red-legged frog and that conservation effort. So, Emily, we're sending it back to you. Brad, again, thank you so much for taking this
Yeah,
time
thank you, Hector. Good
with
to
all
see
of
you.
us.
And good seeing everybody on this call. So I miss you.